Welcome to CyberCast, decoding today's cyber issues. I'm Alexander Bolova, production lead at GovCIO Media and Research. With me today is staff writer researcher Sylvia Oakland. Hi, Sylvia.
Hey, Alex. Good to be here.
You recently had the opportunity to chat with CISA's Secure by Design team. Who'd you chat with?
Yes, so I was able to chat with two wonderful people from CISA's Secure by Design team. I spoke with Jack Cable, who's the senior technical advisor, and then Lauren Zabierek, who's a senior policy advisor there. And we had some really good conversations about the Secure by Design initiative.
Yeah, so tell me more about this initiative. I know that you recorded this and then a little peek behind the scenes requested that we publish this relatively quickly because there is an element of breaking news to it all.
Yeah, so it's pretty fascinating. So CISA Secure by Design, for those who don't know, is really encouraging software companies and people who make software all within that realm to start making their products with security in mind, thinking about having things secure by design, secure by default. So, again, talking about that security and really making sure that it's baked into the product before it even goes out to customers. And one thing that I really liked what they said is kind of shifting the burden of responsibility from the customer to the software companies. And that's not necessarily saying that all the responsibility goes back on the software companies. Simply asking for software companies to take that initiative, to take that action, and to be proactive in order to help their customers. So what made this really fascinating was at the RSA conference where we had some coverage of 68 software companies had signed this pledge of saying that over the next year, they're going to focus on the initiatives of this pledge, and they're going to accomplish what they can and really take the lead on that. And I believe as of right now, when we're recording this, they have nearly 100 software companies who have signed and pledged that they're going to really take the lead on this and try and change that mindset of what software companies were previously doing.
We have to bring the community together. So our goal for the entire community is to shift the security burden from individuals and small businesses. In other words, end users whose business is not a technology development effort or cybersecurity, to technology manufacturers whose business it is and who are in the best position to address and manage security risks.
This is such an exciting initiative, and I'm really interested in hearing more details about Secure by Design and this pledge. So let's not keep our audience waiting. Let's take a listen to your conversation.
Well, Jack and Lauren, thank you so much again for being here today. And I'd love to start just by introducing yourself and kind of what your role is at CISA. And Jack, why don't you go ahead and start for us today?
Great. Thanks so much for having us, Sylvia. Glad to be on talking today about Secure by Design. I'm Jack Cable. I'm a senior technical advisor here at CISA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. I come from a technical background in computer science, software development, and security research. Got into cybersecurity through bug bounty programs where companies would pay me to find flaws in their systems, and eventually decide that I want to go more of the policy and strategy route. Went to work in the Senate through the Tech Congress Fellowship, working on open source software security and election security, and came to CISA a little over a year ago to help lead our work around Secure by Design and open source software security.
Thank you. I'd love to hear all of that diversity in your portfolio. Lauren, how about you?
Thank you, Sylvia. Likewise, really excited to be here to talk about Secure by Design. My name is Lauren Zabierek. I am a senior advisor within the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, with Jack. And interestingly enough, Jack and I started on the same day. So we've been here for, I think, just under a year and a half. But I come from a background of military, the intelligence community, a little bit of private sector and academia, and count over 20 years in the national security space.
Wow, I am hearing very impressive backgrounds from both of you. So I'm very honored and very privileged to have you guys here with me today. And thank you, Jack, also for bringing up that we're going to be talking about the Secure by Design pledge. And there are 7 goals to this pledge, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how you guys chose these 7 goals and kind of that reasoning behind it.
Great. And maybe I'll start even with a little background both on our Secure by Design initiative as well as the pledge, and then get into the goals. So, really, our Secure by Design initiative at CISA, we launched just over a year ago with the goal of shifting the burden of responsibility for cybersecurity away from individuals, away from end users, small businesses, hospitals, schools, you name it, who currently bear that burden, onto those most capable. And namely, that's the technology manufacturers who make the products that underpin our daily lives. And this is very core to the White House's national cybersecurity strategy. With Secure by Design, we want to give actionable guidance to technology manufacturers around steps that they can take to build security into their products, because we think we can't any longer accept the status quo where really security is an afterthought. And as a result, we see all of these vulnerabilities and misconfigurations exploited to damaging effect, whether with ransomware or nation state attacks. We think it's time to really sever that at the source and make sure that products are substantially more secure going forward. So while we put out guidance last year with many international partners, we wanted to step that up and see how we could actually get tech companies to commit to taking actions around Secure by Design. And that's where the pledge comes in, and we announced this at the RSA conference a couple of weeks ago. We got 68 companies on board, including many of the largest software manufacturers in the world, to commit to taking specific actions around Secure by Design. Since then, we've seen 40 plus more sign up. So we're thrilled to see the tremendous interest. And really the goals in the pledge, which I know we'll get into during this conversation, they get directly towards some of the most kind of pervasive aspects of the threat environment we're in today. So we looked at the approaches we see from ransomware actors and nation state actors that we've seen and issued guidance on at CISA, and wanted to really cut down on some of the most common sources of these attacks, like default passwords, like a lack of multi-factor authentication, and systemic classes of vulnerabilities, and see how we could work with tech manufacturers to drive those down at the source.
That is lovely. I love hearing that it is, again, starting at that source, and rather than putting that burden kind of on the customers and the end users. Lauren, do you mind kind of going through the 7 goals that are outlined within the pledge?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I really want to foot stomp what Jack just said. These are really informed by the threat landscape. This isn't just kind of things that we, threw at the wall and said, well, I think this sounds good, right? These are things that we know will meaningfully reduce the number of cyber attacks and keep the nation safer. And so the 7 goals are to measurably increase the use of multi-factor authentication across the manufacturer's products, to reduce default passwords across the products, to make measurable reduction in the prevalence of different vulnerability classes. So we use this term called classes of vulnerability, or really classes of defect, right? So like, instead of doing whack-a-mole and just mitigating or addressing one vulnerability at a time as they pop up, how do we prevent those recurring kinds of vulnerabilities or defects at scale? So we're asking manufacturers to really look into that. So for instance, if we look at memory safety vulnerabilities, if we transition to memory safe programming languages, that's one way that we can really attack something like that at scale. The next goals include increasing the installation of security patches by customers, so making it easier for customers to actually do this. Publishing a vulnerability disclosure policy with Safe Harbor. demonstrating transparency in vulnerability reporting, and that includes making sure that the common weakness enumeration, the common platform enumeration, and the common vulnerabilities and exposure records are all complete and accurate. And then the last one is to demonstrate an increase in the ability for customers to gather evidence of cybersecurity intrusions affecting the manufacturer's products. So you can see, these goals really span the gamut of, the different kinds of attack classes that we're seeing.
Of course. And I think, Lauren, you touched on this just a little bit in this previous question, but how does this pledge kind of build on current best practices and standards that are out there, either that are already put out by CISA or that are put out by NIST and other agencies who are looking to, make sure that things are secure?
It's a great question. Look, we have known how to prevent many of these, as I mentioned, recurring classes of defects in software products for years, right? And as Jack mentioned, our Secure by Design alerts, those are really highlighting those particular defects and showing manufacturers how you can actually prevent or reduce them at scale. So, we mentioned SQL injections, we mentioned reducing the default passwords in those products, things like that. And, so we're really building on the well-known work and approaches that have been developed over the last few decades. What is novel here is that we, as a government, are finally saying that poorly designed technology is really what is enabling the ever-growing cyber attacks. We're really putting the spotlight on this issue and saying that in order to make our nation safer, that it's time that we fix this together, right? Between government, between industry, between all the different stakeholders in the entire ecosystem. And we are articulating a roadmap for how we're going to do it.
And I'll just add on to that that's something we acknowledge in the pledge itself is the value of the existing work, whether standards or other best practices that have already been laid out. And that's evident whether through our Secure by Design guidance, whether through resources like NIST Secure Software Development Framework, and many of the both international and industry best practices and standards out there. So our goal is very much to build on these good resources, and particularly with the pledge, our goal was to see how we could offer a prioritized set of action items for companies to collectively work towards, recognizing that of course, if you do these 7 things, you're not automatically going to have a Secure by Design product, but that this can help in making measurable strides towards a more secure product and also allow companies to differentiate themselves for the actions that they've taken.
Of course. And that leads right into my next kind of topic, which is to date, the pledge has 68 software companies who have given their commitment to Secure by Design. So I was wondering if you guys could talk about the process of gaining these signatures and kind of what that looked like, with going to industry and asking them that we need to make things more secure.
Yep. So the pledge was really many months in the making. So we launched it in May. It took us many months to iterate on the language. The starting point for us was our Secure by Design guidance, of course, that we're now up to 13 countries who have issued it with us. So we looked to distill down from there and kind of overlay that with our view of the threat environment to come up with a list of practices. But we knew, of course, that this couldn't just be something we thought was right. It had to be something that we could get a sizable coalition of companies on board with. So we spent several months working with the Information Technology Sector Coordinating Council, which is the primary forum in which information technology companies coordinate with CISA in its role as a sector risk management agency for the information technology sector. So we coordinated with companies there and collectively really workshopped the items in the pledge and the associated language. And in doing so, we were able to land on language that I was very happy with, because it's both actionable and measurable and specific, in that companies are expected to publicly demonstrate what they're doing as a result of the pledge. But we also know that we need to have flexibility in there, given that every company is going to be at a different point. And some might already be doing some of the things in the pledge and have other areas to improve. Others might be a little earlier on. So we wanted to offer a flexible avenue for companies to take the pledge and articulate over the next year what sorts of actions they're taking as a result of the pledge. And we were very happy that kind of as we workshop this language together, we saw this incredible support from industry. And like I mentioned, we had 68 companies at the launch, which we were extremely happy with. And then since then, we've added well over 40 additional companies. So there's been great interest, and we want to carry the momentum forward. Of course, the signing of the pledge is just the starting point, and we look forward to seeing that actions companies take as a result of it and collaborating with them on that.
Yeah, and I'll just add too, as part of this collaborative process, that from the outset, the IT Sector Coordinating Council and us, we were all very committed to getting to yes, right? And so that was truly our North Star there, really guided all the discussions. And so as Jack mentioned, really happy with how this all ended up, and was really thrilled with the launch last week, and just, the momentum and all the increased interest that we've received.
What are some ways that end users are going to see manufacturers' progress as outlined by this pledge?
So and I think that's a really important point, because, of course, that the pledge is only valuable to the extent that it generates measurable changes in actions by companies. And one of the really great ways in which we think this can be seen is through the kind of collective demands of customers. So part of our hope here is to create a demand signal for products that are more secure by design. And one of the ways in which we hope that the pledge will enable customers to see that is that every item in the pledge has an aspect of the manufacturer should find some way to demonstrate that. We weren't prescriptive on exactly how they had to do that. We include examples, but it could be that there's some that are relatively more straightforward, like publishing a vulnerability disclosure policy, where that's a page on their website and customers and security researchers can see that. For others, like reducing entire classes of vulnerabilities, we want companies to be talking about what approaches they've taken and the resulting benefits that have entailed from there. So really, we think that customers, and we encourage other groups like civil society to also really help in understanding actions that companies have taken as a result, to kind of distill this down into lessons learned for customers. But really, again, we see this as a way for software manufacturers to differentiate themselves and show that they're a leader in secure by design through the actions in line with our secure by design pledge.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, if I'm in industry, if I'm a manufacturer, what is kind of my motivator to participate in the pledge?
It's a great question. And I'm sure there are a lot of companies out there who are thinking about this. They've seen it on LinkedIn, they've seen it in the news, and thinking, hey, should we sign? So I think there are really three distinct reasons why different software manufacturer companies would want to sign. So first, I think that in signing, they're both demonstrating and signaling to their customers and competitors that the company is committed to building their products securely by design. And to me, it's a powerful signal that hopefully will lead to norms in the future, right? Like let's think back to the automobile industry. In the 50s and the 60s, there were no laws about how an automobile should be designed and manufactured. There are no laws about wearing your seatbelt, for instance. Today, though, it's unthinkable that you would get into the car and not put on your seatbelt. And so I think it's a really useful example as to how these things start from the very beginning. You have a lot of early adopters, and then over time, that becomes the norm. The second thing is that I think the pledge can really help guide companies on their security journey because, as we mentioned, there are 7 concrete areas that can really help and sort of guide companies in making strategic decisions and investments. And then finally, I think there's really the added benefit of working together. As a group, we mentioned we want to be very collaborative here. We're not just saying, here you go, you've signed the pledge and you're on your way. We want to be able to work with industry and work with the signers to share information, to democratize best practices and really learn from each other in that spirit of collaboration and in that spirit of radical transparency, which is obviously one of our key secure by design principles.
I love the analogy of the car and the safety features with that. And I also wanted to say happy birthday to Secure by Design. I do know that it has, as you mentioned earlier, it's been a year since it started. And so looking, in a year from now, when the pledge length is done, what accomplishments do you hope to see from these manufacturers?
I love that question. So we know that moving toward greater security will take a long time, right? This isn't just like 1 year and we're done, right? We've solved cybersecurity. But we look at, these intervening years as sort of chunking the actions out over time. And so as I think about that question, there are 6 things that I'm hoping to see, and Jack might have some to add there too. First, I would want to see a change in, from where companies are now to some significant progress, right? So for instance, if a company doesn't have a stated vulnerability disclosure policy right now, in a year, will they? If they don't have multi-factor authentication enabled by default, in a year, they should have that across most of their product lines. So what's the change from the baseline? The second thing I'm looking for is an increase in the companies that are taking the pledge. I'm also looking for increased demand from customers. So Jack mentioned this before, really driving that demand signal. And part of that is increasing awareness among customers that these are things that they can ask for. And not only increasing awareness, but also giving them the tools to actually ask those questions and have those discussions with their vendors. I hope that over the next year or two, we're actually changing the goals of the pledge itself, because that to me will signal, hey, we've made a lot of progress on these stated goals. Let's raise the bar some more. I'm looking for things like blogs, in that spirit of radical transparency. What are some of the trends and the statistics that we're seeing, and what can they report? And then finally, I also think that if we see more jobs out there, job descriptions that are seeking coders and computer scientists with security knowledge and experience, I think that's going to be a really interesting leading indicator.
Of course. Jack, do you have anything to add on that one?
I think that summed it up pretty well. The one thing I'd kind of emphasize is that really I think this is just the start of hopefully kind of a much broader push around radical transparency when it comes to secure by design approaches going forward. Because we know that as an industry, we can only collectively mature if companies are much more open about both what does and doesn't work when it comes to building security into their products. And we've already seen some companies being really good role models here, but we want every company to do that. So I'm really excited to see what these companies who've taken the pledge will be publishing over the following year to kind of be leaders here. And I hope it doesn't just end there. And I hope it's not just limited to kind of blogs and talking about what they're doing, but really making it possible for everyone to do the same, whether that's publishing open source tools around how they've been building security and to help developers, whether it's kind of advancing entire industries through various kind of aspects like around standards for multi-factor authentication and so on. I think there's a lot of great room for companies to collaborate on and help raise the collective baseline.
Of course. And Lauren, when you touched on, what you hope to see in the future, it really did bring me into this next question. And I love when this happens, when this conversation ends up being so seamless. Can we plan to see updates to this pledge in the future? Is that something that CISA is thinking about?
Yeah, we do. And I'd say two main areas. One, we obviously want to iterate on the current version of the pledge. We're excited to see what companies do after a year, and we want to take this on and see how we can kind of continue helping to raise the bar here. One area I'll flag that we don't touch on in the pledge itself, but it is increasingly of interest to us here at CISA, as well as I know to many private companies, is around their use of open source software, where at CISA, we think there's incredible value in open source software and something that enables much of the innovation we see today when it comes to the software industry. At the same time, we know there's very real security concerns that can pop up, like with the compromise of the XZ utils library, which had it not been caught, could have posed quite serious consequences to millions of computers around the world. Likewise, things like the Log4j vulnerability, which what was one of the kind of more pervasive vulnerabilities that we've seen at CISA. So we think that every company who's using open source software has a responsibility to be good stewards of that open source software, help maintain it so that we all can continue to benefit from it. So this is something we're advocating for very broadly and would love to see how we can work some of this into future versions of the pledge around both being responsible consumers of open source software, so vetting the open source software that company is using, making sure that's kept up to date and so on. And then likewise, on the flip side, being sustainable contributors back to help sustain the open source ecosystems we rely upon. So that's where I'd love to take this pledge more broadly, is to work with all the companies who've signed on and see what other items we might want to work towards a year from now. And then second, we do also want to see how we can make this pledge applicable to other areas like hardware and operational technology, where we very intentionally scoped this pledge to enterprise software, but we want to see how perhaps a future version could touch on operational technology and how we can work with manufacturers in those spaces, recognizing that that's an increasingly critical aspect of the defense of our critical systems as well.
I think Jack really just, as usual, summed it up perfectly, and would just say that, I think with our team leading this, and with, the way that our agency just really, helps us approach this, we're just really trying to iterate and be innovative and flexible and see where things go. So yeah, as Jack mentioned, just really excited to see how this evolves over the future.
That's so great to hear. I love hearing when people are passionate and really excited about the work that they're doing. It always brings me joy and, makes me excited about what I'm doing as well. And, Jack, you did allude to this a little bit, but I just want to see if you could expand any more on it. Can we expect, and I guess what can we expect from a pledge in the future that kind of talks about those physical products like Internet of Things and devices and everything?
So it's definitely something that we want to further explore, and have heard interest from many companies that build products in the physical space, that there's some interest there. So it's an area that we are going to be working over the next few months to explore engaging with these companies and seeing what might be possible there.
For sure. And we are down to my last question before we kind of round out today. You talked about how, in the 50s and 60s, there really wasn't a lot of safety or security when it came to cars. And, now it's something that we just don't even think about. So I was wondering if you could kind of give your perspective on how this pledge and everything that's going to come from it, how are all of these things going to impact end users' experiences at the end of the day?
It's a great question. I really think that the customer user experience, especially when it comes to security settings, is so important because adoption often comes down to usability. That's human nature, right? So, and I think there are some major aspects of this pledge that really get at this. And I'll just provide maybe two examples. This enabling multi-factor authentication by default, right? Which is part of this, secure by design, secure by default idea, making it so that customers not only are alerted when, say, a product is in an unsafe configuration, but then also they don't have to do too much to actually make sure it's already safe, right? They don't have to spend very precious time and resources in order to do that. And then, another example would be getting and deploying patches in a way that, again, makes it easier. Maybe that's auto patching, maybe that's something else. But right now, I think where you see that the uptake in patching is not where it should be, I think that could speak to, the user experience of actually having to patch. I mean, look, we know that it takes a lot of time and resources on the part of the customer. So how do we make it easier? I'm all about making things easier for humans as a way to reduce that burden, but really as a way to increase adoption, and get us to more of where we need to be.
I love to hear that things will be easier to use. And that is something I'm also a really big advocate for. Lauren and Jack, thank you both so much for speaking with me today. Before we, hop off, is there anything else that either of you would like to add, either about CISA or the Secure by Design pledge before we hop off?
I'll just say that, of course, we'd love to hear from anyone, and particularly if there's any software manufacturers listening into this, please do consider taking the Secure by Design pledge. You can find more information on our Secure by Design website at cis.gov/secure by design.
Yeah, and I'll just say too, I know I mentioned our second principle sort of obliquely, but I do want to make sure that we actually state what our three secure by design principles are. And I think they're really important, obviously, because it forms the basis for this whole thing, but they're different in a way that they're aimed at the business leaders, right? The leaders of these technology manufacturers, not at the developers, not at the so-called technical people. We want business leaders to really make those strategic investments in those decisions in prioritizing security, prioritizing quality in their products. And so the first principle is that manufacturers should take ownership for their customer security outcomes. The second one, as I mentioned, is to embrace radical transparency and accountability. And finally, the third principle is to lead from the top, to create the structures and the incentives and allocate resources actually needed to make this shift in their company. So yeah, just wanted to emphasize those principles. And as Jack mentioned, definitely check out our website. CISA.gov/secure by design. We have a ton of blogs, our white paper, our secure by design alerts. We're constantly putting out new ones. Check us out on, especially on LinkedIn, where, especially our colleague Bob Lord is often putting out really great analyses and using, different forms of AI to create images and things like that on secure by design. But really appreciate the opportunity, Sylvia, to discuss this. And really, really grateful.
Thank you, Sylvia. That was a great conversation with Jack Cable and Lauren Zabierek. Before we let our listeners go, do you have any last highlights or takeaways that you want to leave them with?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that people should take away from this is that CISA does not want to be the only voice in the room. They want to make customers be the ones making those demands. So for any of our audience members out there who are customers of any software, I would really encourage them to check and see if their names are on this pledge. And if they aren't, I would highly encourage them to, rally and ask the software companies to consider being a part of this initiative, because I think it's really important, especially as we move on and into the future with everything cybersecurity going on. It's truly important. So again, just consider signing that pledge themselves. And if you are a software company, really heeding the advice that CISA says, and also checking out that pledge and making sure that they're keeping up with standards and customer demand.
Definitely. I know that we have talked lots on CyberCast about making sure that security isn't just something that's bolted on at the end, and consumers have been receiving education about cybersecurity, but at the end of the day, we can't put the burden on them. And by them, I mean us. So let's make sure that security is at the forefront of technological development. And yeah, I think this pledge is a great step towards making, frankly, all of our lives a lot more safe and secure. Well, thank you again, Sylvia. Listeners can tune in next week for a brand new podcast in our GovCIO Media and Research feed. But until then, if you like what you heard, make sure you leave a review and a 5-star rating. And hey, tell a friend. We always appreciate growing our audience. I'm Alexander Bolova.
And I'm Sylvia Oakland.
Thank you for listening. CyberCast, along with GovCast and HealthCast, is a production of GovCIO Media and Research. To explore our content, visit our website, govciomedia.com. Keep an eye out for new episodes every Tuesday. And if you like what you heard, leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. Have a topic you want us to discuss? Contact us at newsletter@govcio.com.